A former banking executive and close associate of Jeffrey Epstein has confirmed that the late child trafficker helped him meet with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That's of course after he met with Snow White. And who was that? And what did they do? Well, you're gonna find out in this amazing story.
Well, Cenk, I will start this story off by noting that this investigation shouldn't be carried out by the House Oversight Committee. It should be carried out by federal prosecutors, but for some reason, federal prosecutors refuse to investigate this. So we're left with, closed door testimony featuring these people who had pretty close relationships with Epstein. Now, whether or not anything is gonna happen as a result of these hearings, I don't know. But the Epstein associate that we are discussing here is the former JPMorgan Chase executive, Jes Staley, who just testified before the House Oversight Committee. Now, Staley's relationship with Epstein began in 2000. And it turns out that the two were much closer than most realize. Staley called his friendship with Epstein profound, and Epstein called him family. Family. Okay. So we already suspected that Epstein connected Benjamin Netanyahu to Jes Staley back in 2011, thanks to some reporting in the Daily Beast earlier. I'll give you the relevant excerpts where they write that in March of 2011, one JPMorgan employee wrote to JPMorgan executive Jes Staley and another high-level executive, against all odds, we have been granted a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Staley forwarded the message to Epstein and wrote, "Thanks," to which the convicted sex offender replied, "Surprise, surprise." Okay, now while under questioning from the House Oversight Committee, Staley confirmed that Epstein was in fact the individual who facilitated that meeting. Because Epstein was very likely working for the Israelis, but we'll put that aside for now.
He says surprise, surprise, sarcastically, meaning like, of course I could set up a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu because he's working directly with him. It's in the emails, but our media still says he has no connections to Israel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. Our media is like working against us by literally misinforming us about the relationship that Epstein had with Israel, with Netanyahu. But anyway, again, putting that aside, let's get to what Staley said during this House Oversight Committee hearing. So Jes Staley said, I met with the sheikh who ran the ports for Dubai, and then he had connections in Israel, and I met with senior officials in Israel that Epstein knew. Representative Anna Paulina Luna responded with, who did you meet? Staley responds with, I met Ehud Barak and I met the Prime Minister Netanyahu. Okay, fascinating. So Luna didn't press any further, but thankfully someone else did. So here is the back and forth between Staley and Senior Counsel for Investigations, Ellison Tolan. We've removed the irrelevant excerpts that are part of this exchange, so I just want to give you that note. Totally irrelevant parts that we took out. Here is the relevant part. So Ellison Tolan says, have you met Benjamin Netanyahu? Jes Staley says once. Tolan responds, where was this? Staley says, in the Prime Minister's office in Israel. Okay, so at that point, you have Tolan asking, did Mr. Epstein facilitate the meeting? And Jes Staley confirms, yes, he did. Okay, so Tolan asks, why? At this point, Staley says, I asked him to. He knew that I was trying to meet with the Prime Minister and I was having difficulty getting on his calendar. And I mentioned that to Epstein, and then I met with the Prime Minister. So Staley refused to define Epstein's relationship to Netanyahu other than stating, I just think he knew him. Tolan asks, why would you ask Mr. Epstein to help you get on his calendar? Staley says, I think he had relationships with individuals in Israel. He knew Ehud Barak well. And I think he may have mentioned that he knew Benjamin Netanyahu. So I asked if he could help get me a meeting. Staley told the House Oversight Committee that he wanted to meet with Netanyahu on official business with JPMorgan Chase. Tolan says, what did you discuss at the meeting? Staley says, I just think we talked about the Middle East and geopolitics, nothing specific. All right, I'm gonna pause right there just briefly, Cenk. I think we discussed geopolitics, nothing specific. Is anyone buying that? Is anyone buying that?
Yeah.
I'm not buying that.
So look, this guy's a banker and there's a ton of money here, but Netanyahu still didn't meet with him until Epstein makes one call and instantly he gets a meeting with Netanyahu. So, and as we showed you with the drop site news stories, every deal that Epstein made internationally was for the benefit of Israel. He would procure cyber weapons for them. He would make deals with them for Russia, Mongolia, and all sorts of countries all across the world. And if you couldn't get a meeting with Netanyahu, that's okay, you call Epstein. And Epstein is so ingrained in the Israeli government that he can get you a meeting just like that. And then when you email him, hey, thanks, he goes, yeah, surprise, surprise. Yeah, if you're in the Israeli government at a very high level, then you could immediately get meetings with Netanyahu for anyone you like. And that's why you sarcastically say, surprise, surprise. I told you, And so this is overwhelming evidence that Epstein worked with the Israelis. And yet the media will tell you going forward that he didn't, and that's some sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory or something. They generally just don't even bother addressing it, Anna, because they know that if they talk about it, everyone will realize it's super obvious that Epstein worked with Israel, and they don't want anyone finding out. But if they do talk about it, they'll call it a conspiracy theory 100%, like the conspiracy theory that he was killed in prison and didn't hang himself.
Yeah, the second something is labeled a conspiracy theory now, I immediately want to investigate it to see how accurate it is. Okay, instead of immediately brushing it off like I used to, like a moron, now I actually investigate it to see if there's any credibility to the claim. Because let me tell you something, a lot of those crazy kooky conspiracy theorists ended up being right about a lot of things. But let me get back to the exchange between Staley and Tolan, because at that point in the conversation, Tolan asks, why was he also interested in meeting with you, meaning Netanyahu? Staley says, this is 2011. Tolan says, Staley responds with, I was a senior executive of JPMorgan. JPMorgan had a lot of business in the Middle East. Tolan asks, so you were meeting with him on behalf of JPMorgan? And at that point, Staley says, yes. And look, we should note that according to the New York Times, Epstein met with Netanyahu in Israel during the late 1980s. And so he definitely did have a relationship with Netanyahu. Staley knew that, and Staley tapped Epstein to get onto Netanyahu's calendar. That much is true. I don't believe Staley in the vague statements he's making about the conversation he had with Netanyahu. I think he knows exactly what they discussed, and I don't think he's being forthright about what they actually talked about. But nonetheless, this country's most powerful people are disgusting, okay, are disgusting. And if you don't believe me yet, wait till you hear the rest of what he testified on.
Yeah, Snow White's coming up next. But real quick on this, why did Epstein get involved with the Israelis and Netanyahu back in the 1980s? Well, we know, again, through the drop site news articles that he was involved in the Iran-Contra affair, and Mossad helped clean the planes that the CIA was using to bring in drugs. What it means to clean them is like money laundering. They were sold to the guy who owns Victoria's Secrets, who Epstein was connected to and running his money. So Epstein is in the middle of a deal with Mossad and the CIA during Iran-Contra in the 1980s. I mean, it doesn't get any more connected to the Israeli government than that.
It's nuts, it's nuts.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.